Welcome and thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a few moments.
Hello, and welcome to today's American Nuclear Society program, Securing Isotope Supply Chain. It's a growing global challenge. So I'm Paul Dickman, President of the World Council on Isotopes and Chair of the ANS External Affairs Committee, and I'm honored today to moderate today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to cover some brief notes. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A function at the bottom, and I'll attempt to address them as many questions as possible. The event will be recorded, and a link to the recordings will be emailed to registrants tomorrow. Additionally, certificates of attendance for the event are available by request. Please see the chat for contact information. And finally, we ask all participants to adhere to the ANS Code of Ethics and Respectable Behavior Policy, which can be found at ans.org. With those notes out of the way, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Today, it's Steve Bogowski, who serves as the chair of the Nuclear Radiological Engineering and Medical Physics program at Georgia Tech University. Samantha Schell, who is a program manager for the Californium-252 production at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Anikos Garofolakis, who's a senior medical radioisotope advisor at the NEA in Paris, where he focuses on security and supply of medical isotopes. And Richard Wiens, who is the Director of Business Development and Strategy Supply at Nordion, a Sotera Health company. Well, thank you all for joining me. And so let me start off by setting the stage a bit. First, every modern society depends on isotopes, often without really realizing it. They sterilize 40% of all single-use medical devices. They power diagnostic imaging, initiate nuclear reactor startups, and ensure the integrity of aircraft and turbine components. Yet this critical global system is fragile and increasingly dependent upon foreign sources, particularly for two isotopes that we're going to talk about today, because they show the wider vulnerability of the supply chain. Specifically, cobalt-60, which is used for sterilizing medical equipment and cancer therapy, is produced primarily in Canada, Russia, and China. Californium-252 is a neutron emitter, vital for reactor startups, neutron radiography, well logging, and is only produced at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and in Russia. With efforts to limit imports from Russia, these two isotopes illustrate what happens when critical isotopes become geopolitical instruments rather than purely scientific commodities. The risk of unplanned outages, reactor retirements, and political disruption can quickly cascade into shortages that impact medicine, energy, and research globally. Today, we have a very distinguished panel, hopefully not extinguished, representing the scientific, industrial, and policy communities. And we'll explore how we can strengthen these fragile links through innovation, collaboration, and outsourcing. Now, I'm going to start off by asking each one of our panel to help set the stage with some brief comments about where they see the state of isotope supply and demand and the global issues facing us in that as the demand increases. So I'm going to start off from Anikos Garofolakis, who's in Paris. And Anikos, why don't you start off by setting the stage for us?
Yeah. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mr. Dickman, for this introductory speech. I'm very happy to be here and present on behalf of the OECD NEA. It is true that the medical radioisotope supply it's a fragile supply chain. From our experience, where we focus mostly on molybdenum-99 and lutetium-177, we all know that there have been challenges in the past, in the last 15 years, for securing the supply chain and build redundancy on the production capacity. Efforts have been made in the past. OECD has contributed to principles that could mitigate possible shortages, but these challenges persist. Shutdowns are quite regular. At the same time, we have the rise of therapeutic radioisotopes like lutetium-177, actinium-225. So we are at a period where we have to work in coordination. Well, all actors need to coordinate in order to mitigate those problems and ensure that production at scale will be available for these life-saving isotopes. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Yes, sir. Again, I do think that the Russia-Ukraine war has really highlighted the instability within the isotope supply market. And this is both with radioactive isotopes like cobalt-60 and californium-252 that you mentioned in the intro, but also with stable isotope supplies. And what we see is that there's often medical or even industrial processes in the United States that require these radioactive and stable isotopes. And they don't dominate the cost of particular items or medical procedures. However, with limited supplies across the world, we end up in a situation with a very fragile market where our medical procedures or industrial processes are limited because we allowed ourselves to have a marketplace where we just went with the cheapest option worldwide. So I think we have to look at creative options where we are able to identify paths and maybe additional costs for a robust isotope supply chain where we're not significantly changing end product costs significantly, but we may want to set up and understand how robust supply chains may benefit our medical and industry use and how policy may fit into that realm.
Thank you. Sam.
Yeah, just kind of to echo what everybody else said, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine had a huge impact on isotope production, especially in the US. I think we've seen that with many isotopes, and californium is not unique to that. One thing to point out about californium, like you said, is there are only 2 reactors in the world that can make it. That's our high flux isotope reactor at Oak Ridge and the SM3 reactor in Russia. So we're really at a pinch point, and it's been interesting over the last little bit.
Well said, I guess. Richard.
Well, I would say cobalt's in a little bit of a different state in that there are 5 countries, including Russia, of course, but there are 5 countries actively producing cobalt-60, with the exception of 1 reactor out of the 20 that produce cobalt-60. All the rest of them are power reactors. So we have this, we have a diversity of supply. And we also have kind of a highly reliable network in terms of uptime. So we're not, we don't suffer the same kind of issues that the network of research reactors does insofar as producing isotopes go. I would also say that we're in better shape now than we have been through the sort of 2018 to 2023 period, where we had this strange kind of conflation of things happening, including a reduction in supply, which was in part related to something that happened in Russia, but long before the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as an unexpected increase in demand. So one of the themes you will probably hear from me throughout this conversation is that one of the things that makes it very, very difficult and challenging to help people make investments in production capacity is predicting demand, right? Because a lot of these things have a very long lead time in terms of getting programs set up. They're very expensive. And if you don't know whether the market is going to grow at 1 or 2 or 5 or 10%, that makes it very challenging. But I would say in general, although we have challenges in the cobalt space, we also have taken some pretty decent mitigation efforts, and I'm sure we'll talk about those a little more.
Yeah, well, actually, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit more about this? How does Nordion, I mean, let's face it, Nordion is one of the largest companies in the world for supply, certainly for the United States. It's our major, one of the most important radioisotope suppliers. But so how are you managing these long-term contracts and amid all these, with these uncertainties around you?
So there's a few things I would say, right? One is we do have long-term contracts with these utilities in the province of Ontario, which produces about 50% of the global supply. We are fortunate enough to have really good support from all levels of government and the public in general for nuclear power. And what that means is that there are huge investments being made in refurbishment, which is good for us. So we're confident that we'll have the ability to produce these isotopes for decades into the future. The one example I would point to is the Darlington reactor site, which has 4 large CANDUs. They're in the process of refurbishing those 4 units. They've done 3 of them. There's 1 to go at a cost of 12 or 13 billion Canadian dollars. We saw an opportunity to get in there and essentially retrofit those reactors to be able to produce cobalt-60. So we're well along that way, and we'll see the first cobalt out of those reactors in the sort of the latter part of this decade. So that's one example for CANDUs. One thing that's new to us and globally, frankly, is the development of technology for producing in U.S. pressurized water reactors. So the U.S. consumes about 50% of the global supply of cobalt-60, but there's effectively no domestic production, especially for low specific activity cobalt that's used for industrial purposes like sterilization of medical devices. So we've embarked on a program to be able to produce cobalt in the U.S., and we're very near to being able to announce some pretty exciting news on that front.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, actually, let's turn a little bit to California then, because Sam, I don't think you can say the same thing. But it's the one thing I think was important to point out is that what Richard was talking about was the underlying government support and working with the industry to move this forward. But I'm not sure we have the same ability to do that with the Californian.
Yeah, it's quite different. So I will say that industry has given the isotope program a lot of help with Californium in the past. So we're unique in that we have a consortium of customers that have a contract to buy Californium every year. So that's kind of how we're structured and set up. But yeah, things are a bit different from us. So like I said, there are only 2 reactors that can make Californium, and that's one of many challenges. So we also need heavy feedstock, such as curium, to be able to make that Californium. Curium is, of course, an also precious isotope that we don't have, a ton of, but we do have a supply for this program. I think we have seen demand really uptick in the last couple of years, and I think that has a lot to do with the new nuclear renaissance that we're foreshadowing in the future. So with AI coming online and standing up reactors for that, as well as SMRs that are supposed to be coming online, the demand for Californium is really skyrocketing.
Huh. Well, that's yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why we're so interested in where we can go with Californium. But you did mention something which I think is important, is the target materials, because we tend to forget about the chain. And Steve mentioned, for example, stable isotopes, which we know is an essential part of any one of radioisotope programs. And so I don't know, Steve, I was going to kind of pass this over to you, because I think that front end part of target material, be it stable or radioactive, is really something which we tend to get overlooked a lot. And I don't know what we can do to enhance that. I mean, from your perspective, what's your view?
Well, first off, there's a lot of niche areas within stable isotope supplies that are very important. So within my own world, we've historically done a lot of radioxenon production based on stable, isotopes that have been enriched in xenon, so you can produce very specific radionuclides with high purity. We also see a lot of work going on right now with lithium, and both stable isotopes of lithium have different industrial uses. But again, we're seeing limits within the supply chain and where that had happened. And again, this feeds back to the Russia-Ukraine war, that a lot of that production, just due to the fact that Russia was able to produce things for less than we were in the United States, pushed a lot of that market to go to Russia. And then now what's happening is we're trying to rebuild that supply chain within the United States of some of these stable isotopes. However, there's these market forces at play. Companies are hesitant to invest a significant amount of money when that, again, the Russia-Ukraine war, I believe, will end sometime. And then will that reset that? How is that going to affect the market? And then, again, as an investor, are you going to put in a lot of money into a potentially unstable market? And so we do see stable isotopes do mirror a lot of the radioactive isotope supply chain issues. And again, I think that there's a lot of value that we need to explore within the United States of creating, again, robust supply chains, with a good portion of those supply chains having some domestic origin.
So, Nikos, I know that NEA right now is conducting a major global survey of production of isotopes. I know you've targeted the 3 isotopes, so you're also looking at the production for Moly-99 as well. And really, this is a major survey you're doing. And can you tell us a little bit about why you're doing it now and what the intended purpose is? I know it's a forward-looking for next 10 years, but so where are you guys in that survey process?
Yeah, let me speak a little bit about this survey and study. In fact, we are surveying for 4+1 radioisotopes, lutetium-177, astatine, actinium, lead, and we take a look at the diagnostic radioisotope molybdenum-99. The idea is that we have identified the potential of radioligand therapy and theranostics. We have heard through different workshops and congresses the impact that radiopharmaceuticals implementing these radioisotopes can have in the cancer treatment. And we expect to have a high demand for these radioisotopes. There are a lot of publications projecting the patient eligibility. We have 2 approved treatments already, but more are expected to be approved in the future, given the big number of clinical trials today. So we want to say if the supply can meet the future demand. And as an agency, this has been traditionally our role. So we are in the process of asking isotope producers of these 4 therapeutic radioisotopes to project their capacities for the next 5 to 10 years. And these surveys will be analyzed and published and be available to the public. At the same time, we thought, since we're doing this effort of reaching out to isotope producers, it is also an opportunity to go back to the molybdenum-99 and see if we can give long-term projections. Our work complements the work of organizations like Nuclear Medicine Europe, who is monitoring the production capacity at the, let's say, real-time level. So they are responsible for the monitoring of its research reactor. What we are doing is to look at the long-term capacity projections. and try to anticipate in the future what will be the capacity, given that new projects implementing research reactors, power reactors, even accelerators might add to the global capacity in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, thank you for mentioning research reactors, because I know that's near and dear to a lot of members of the ANS heart, and particularly Steve. And, this is really one of the questions that comes up. It's, our research reactors are an important part of our supply arrangements, but, a lot of them are fairly old, and they're not getting better. So, you want to talk a little bit about what role the research reactors play in the current community, and I also know that there are several that are being proposed. I know MER is developing a new one, but this is again one of those areas where people don't really appreciate within the U.S. the research reactors, both at universities and other locations, what role they play in medical isotope or isotope production. I tossed that to you, Steve. Did you?
All right, so I was waiting for others. Well, again, I think that there's a lot that's going on within the research reactor community within the United States, including new developments of, we'll say, research reactors, and we'll give kudos to an Natura research reactor that's being installed at Abilene Christian University, where the utilization of a molten salt fuel, where you actually have the fuel salt as a liquid, has potential for a lot of isotope production and could provide significant benefits along those lines. Now, again, most of the reactor industry is focused towards electrical power, but I do think that there is a lot of ways to augment the research reactor fleet, especially for the production of boutique isotopes, but also for just building in resiliency within the system. We have somewhere, at least in the universities within the United States, we have mid-20s with the number of research reactors, and being able to figure out how those integrate within our supply chains a little bit better may be helpful. But again, most of those reactors are not operating 24/7. So they're not going to be in the same realm, both neutron flux as well as operations-wise, as HIFER may. So we really have to look at how those reactors may be able to fit into different type of supply chains. I don't know that they would, unless it was minor supplies and really, again, boutique isotopes, some of those research reactors may not be able to be the primary suppliers, but I would really see that there would be some benefit in investigating their utilization as sort of building up robustness within the supply chain. And then also, as we're looking at advanced reactors coming online and how those advanced reactors, again, first ones might be research reactors, and they might be looking for more longer-term goals than just demonstrating certain reactor physics or demonstrating certain reactor principles. Some of those prototype reactors that are being built for our advanced reactor fleets may also have opportunities for future utilization to, again, build up our isotope supply chains.
That's an interesting concept. When you think about the disruptions that we had in Moly 99 and lutetium productions, what the impacts were with those, what really were the lessons that we learned from those? I kind of toss that out to everybody, because I think that taking those lessons and applying them to our existing system to try to build resiliency in there is really a key element. So, anybody want to grab that one, Steve?
Well, and again, when we look at different reactors and their utilization, again, we have a wide range of power levels that, again, relates to neutron flux, that relates to, our ability to produce the different isotopes. But we also end up having, and again, what it comes down to, it is different types of operational schedules, and whether or not something's a 24/7 operation versus much more of a 7 to 8 hour a day type of operation type mode. So what we're really looking at is, again, just trying to, I think that there will be a lot of value in studying what the supply chain needs are. And I think we heard, I guess it was Richard who said that earlier, is just understanding what the demand signal is. I think we're all good enough to be able to figure it if we just had our crystal ball to tell us what the future demand was. I think we could easily come into play to figure out then how to make those supplies happen. And so again, within the United States, we do have the Office of Isotopes, that is part of their mission and part of their goal. But when we combine, again, what I'll say, I'm in academics with industries and national labs across the United States, this is a continuing effort because that demand is continually changing, and we'll have to keep those, keep those analyses going.
Yeah.
So maybe I can take a crack at kind of answering the last two questions around research reactors, and then what have we learned. So I think we frankly need a combination. So I think we learned we need the reliability and the 24/7 operation of something like a power reactor once we get to scale. So in the province of Ontario, both of the big utilities, Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power, have invested in production systems that allow them to make theoretically a variety of short-lived isotopes in CANDU reactors, including one was specifically built for production of lutetium-177, and the other one for moly-99, and now lutetium as well, and yttrium-90 and some other things. And so I think the good news there is people have figured out how to do that. We still need research reactors for the early stages, because it's just not it's not cost effective to make little tiny bits of unobtainium or whatever it is you're interested in researching in a power reactor. So I think we need that combination of ultimate flexibility and scale into the future. But again, I think it's good news because we've kind of gone down that road. And I will say, generally speaking, I just came back from the European Association of Nuclear Medicine conference in Barcelona. And because of this kind of resurgence of interest in, particularly in therapeutic isotopes, there's a lot of attention that's being paid to how can we make these things, not only in nuclear reactors, but cyclotrons and linacs as well. So I think that's great that we've got that attention. We have to figure out how to attach ourselves to that and leverage it to the hilt.
Well, you raised an interesting question, because one of the things that I think we've all been curious about is how realistic is to start shifting production to non-reactor and new reactor systems. You mentioned linacs, accelerators, modular. Can they really? Well, in the short term, they probably can't meet supply demands. But on the other hand, these maybe that's a way to build resiliency. Some in the future is in this area. Was relying on this. Actually, I was going to toss this to Sam, because one of the questions that I had is that, as you know, we're captive in producing californium from 2 reactors. What alternatives are there to producing californium in something other than a fast reactor? Is there an alternative?
Not currently, and realistically, cost and efficiency wise, it doesn't really seem worth it. I think if we wanted to build or reduce risk and build resiliency, we should build another high flux isotope reactor, in my opinion.
Well, I can tell you, I 100% support you. I absolutely agree. And HYFER is a great workhorse, but it's it's aging. Okay, you're what, 60 years old now, I think. The reactor.
And that brings up a good point, right? I mean, HYFER is going to be going down in the FY29 timeframe for the beryllium reflector replacement, as well as, in the next 10 years, it will probably go out for its pressure vessel replacement also. So there are a lot of things coming up in the next couple years for isotopes in general that we're keeping a very close eye on.
That's important, because again, getting back to resiliency and the availability, it's going to be a problem, because you guys, I looked at your schedule one time and I couldn't see any gaps in it for several years out. So you guys are busy, which gets back to the issue of how do we again build capacity in the U.S. or even within our associated countries or our allies here. And I think that's an issue. There was a question which was raised a while ago, was that do our export controls or regulations that aggravate our supply risk And I guess maybe Richard, you're the one who spends a lot of time in this area. I'm kind of curious about from your view.
Yeah, so they do, and I'd spend way more time thinking about that stuff than I would like to. But in terms of the U.S., as I mentioned before, is 100% reliant on foreign supply for cobalt-60. The good news is that today cobalt-60 shipments from Canada are USMCA compliant, so there isn't a tariff. There isn't a tariff implication today. Now, if that changed tomorrow, that would be another thing. But the reality is that globally, Russia still produces between 20 and 50% in any given year of the global supply of cobalt-60, and some of that inevitably ends up in the U.S. So it's important, and we don't have short-term solutions, right? I talked a little bit about our project with Westinghouse to develop technology for US PWR production, which we believe will be able to make a significant shift, but not probably until starting in the 2030s. So today there's still reliance on Russian supply to some extent. The good news is that around the world, governments, including the US government and the Canadian government and the European governments, understand the importance of cobalt-60 continuing to get into the US market. The US uses 50% because they produce about 50% globally of all single-use medical devices. So really important to keep cobalt continuing to flow. So it is a challenge. Unfortunately, things happen where cobalt gets caught up almost unintentionally in sanctions, and we have to kind of disentangle that. But the good news is we've managed to sort of navigate our way around those things. And again, people understand the importance of keeping that supply chain going. So far we've been able to do that.
One of the key elements of the supply chain is my favorite topic, which is transportation and packaging, because I see that as one of our greatest vulnerabilities. And obviously the cobalt-60 shipments are an example of that. But Nikos, I know NEA has spent a fair amount of time looking at transportation and packaging issues. But what is the agency doing right now to try to look at how to, make this a little bit easier? I mean, obviously, the international packaging arrangements vary by country, and package certifications vary. But this is one of the key vulnerabilities of a robust supply chain, is really having the packaging and transportation systems in place.
Yeah, I agree. And this is the echo from people in the supply chain, especially doctors, nuclear medicine physicians, the end users. They complain about problems in the supply chains that is due to logistical and transportational issues. At this particular moment, we are mostly gather insights from people and organizations in the sector. So we would like to, even from delegations from countries. So we are in the process of gathering information and insights on problems related to transportation. What we have identified is that there is a lack of harmonization in the regulation framework. Our agency is working closely with IAEA, which is the organization which is mostly responsible for establishing frameworks in terms of regulations. So we are working in close partnership with IAEA in understanding the issues that are related to the transportations. I have something to say that this problem has been particularly present now, given the rise in the use of therapeutic radioisotopes, meaning that the regulations should follow the high demand for therapeutic radioisotopes. Each radioisotope has unique characteristics. Each radioisotope needs a different packaging conditions to be transported. So there is a lot of work trying to make sure that regulations follow the use of therapeutic radioisotopes and be able to meet the demands for international transportation without any particular bottlenecks.
Well, like I said, this is one of my favorite topics because I've seen this happen time and time again, that the ability to move material around is restricted by the availability of packages. I don't know. Have you experienced that anywhere? Richard or Sam, availability of packaging.
So I would so in my lane in the Cobalt 60 world, one of the frankly competitive advantages that we have is that we have probably the largest fleet of Type B containers on the planet, and specifically so that we don't run into that problem. But I would say from a from what was just mentioned around lack of harmonization, one of the big challenges, of course, is if you take that same package with the same content and ship it to 40 different countries, you're going to have 40 different regulatory regimes to deal with, right? Which adds to complexity. The second part of that, and it's almost as important as the packages themselves, is the network of carriers that are willing to take Class 7 material, right? So if you're shipping short-lived isotopes and you only need effectively a cardboard box to shield them, a Type A package, you've still got the challenges with, and you could argue in some ways even more challenges. My isotope has a 5-year half-life, so it sits on a ship for an extra week. It's not such a big deal, but you've got something that's literally got a patient's name on the dose, and they're supposed to get it on Tuesday, and you can't get it on the right airplane, or it gets hung up in customs or something like that. So I would say we need innovation in package design. So admittedly, the Gen 1 of our main package was 1965 or something like that, right? And it's been revved up, but there haven't been significant innovations to a large extent in the package world, in part because of the regulatory burden associated with doing that. I think with, again, the current interest in radiotherapeutics, that's starting to change. So there are more and more companies thinking about, what new and out of the box things do I need to be able to do to be able to ship these things around the world, and particularly as you get shorter and shorter half-lives, how you deal with that.
Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, it's a little less complicated for us. I mean, we have in the last several decades gone to only shipping Type A containers. We used to ship Type B as well, but all of our customers are stateside, so we don't have that complication of logistics. And we ship everything in A1 quantities. So our casks,
Okay.
very old, probably also from, the late 60s maybe, but not much has changed in that regard for us.
Well, I do agree that harmonization of regulations, particularly on packaging, would make a lot of sense because in most cases the analysis are the same, but nonetheless, it's been a stumbling block in a lot of areas. I know personally, I was involved several years ago with the NRC's rejected ductile cast iron as a shipping cask for spent fuel. Yet that's what the Germans were using, the French were using, everybody else. But it was just within their whole psyche. It was just something you did not want to accept. I mean, that's changed, but I'm just saying that's a classic example of where a whole system in Europe was being used that was rejected in the U.S. And yet it was a perfectly safe mechanism for doing it. So I do think that an effort to take this on would be valuable. Well, I guess we spent a lot of time on my favorite topic, so sorry guys, but I think it's important because you can't have resiliency if you don't have the ability to move material around. So I do want to spend a little bit more time about the role of public-private partnerships, because I think that's clearly where a lot of stuff has to move to. Governments cannot support and sustain programs by themselves. They have to have industry, and those industry demands, I think, as Richard, you pointed out, and Steve and others, is the investments come in when you understand what the demands are. So but what kind of frameworks do you see coming forward in terms of being able to do this? I mean, it's a difficult topic because, again, we have so many different isotopes, we have different applications and uses, but nonetheless, I do see this becoming much more of an industry and where there's engagement. I just point out the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council is a good example of a trade association with something like 80 or 90 members, and they do a lot of harmonization of efforts. In fact, just as an FYI, when Air Canada was going to have a strike, they were notifying all the members, asking what the impacts would be if they couldn't get their materials out, because Air Canada would go on strike. So that's kind of an example of interacting within a trade association. But yeah, I don't really have any comments on that. No, Steve?
Well, I would say so. This isn't exactly around private-public partnerships, but more around government support. So I think full disclosure, I sit on the board of the CNIC. So thanks for your kind comments there. And it's a very, very effective organization. We're up to 125 members at this point, and an increasing number of international members, including folks in the US, which is great. But the point is, getting government engagement in all of this is absolutely critical. And again, I'll use a self-serving example in the US, where we've got this technology, we have some lead utilities that are very, very interested in deploying it, but the amount of money that a utility can make producing isotopes versus what they can make producing electricity is minuscule, right? So we really need government involvement in terms of helping people understand the importance of having a resilient supply chain, right? And helping out, with money. We're always happy to take money, but moreover, other policy, establishing other policy that would make it easier for a utility, for instance, to step forward and say, yeah, we want to be part of producing life-saving isotopes for the US. So I think that's critical. We've in Canada, we've had money basically at all levels for supporting these kinds of things, all the way from our basic R&D through scale up. So I think that's a model. And industry is super well engaged, right? But there's a certain amount of risk with these things that private companies just are not willing to entertain on their own. They're not asking for 100% government funding, but they're asking for some help in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I guess let me toss this out. So what kind of policy reforms or incentives do you think can be out there to help enhance a U.S. isotope capability? I mean, other than just money, is there other things that we can throw out there? I was going to toss that to Steve, because obviously I was looking for research reactors as a good example of something which the U.S. could invest more money in.
Well, right. And again, some of that infrastructure is there. Different DOE has had, again, a lot of our isotopes, radioactive isotopes, get produced from stable isotopes, right? And so setting up, there are some things that make sense for the industry to set up. There are certain things that may be done better through the Department of Energy. And so setting up some of those feeds for stock materials, but probably some of the better things that we can see is having industry sort of make very clear demand signals, and making sure that the government agencies that are involved are there to assist, but not take over, right? So getting things from development to the point where industry maybe needs to finish a research and development effort, or build a certain, again, supply chain, maybe of the stock materials needed for the isotope production, to then, again, as you're sort of saying later, we're going to get HIFER 2, 3, and 4, 5 up, that a lot of those long-term visions, and we've been involved in a lot of those discussions through the years of what's the next generation reactor that's needed for everything from materials testing for advanced reactors to isotope production. And there's been a lot of this discussion, but nothing's really happened, right? And so we're getting to a point where we're going to really be limited, not because we didn't have the conversations, it's because we had the conversations and nothing really went forward. So I think that there's been a lot of this that's been well discussed and beaten up, but we really need to sort of have the government lay the foundation in the directions of the needs that the industry is formatting. And in addition to that, again, some of the very key U.S. infrastructure for, say, stable isotope production, as well as some of our high flux reactors and, very key instruments within these isotope supply chains, we have to make sure that there's longevity in our current infrastructure.
Yeah, that's very important. I would just point out, I do think the Office of Science Isotope Program has a pretty broad view, robust view, and I think they do a pretty good job. But they're also somewhat limited in what they can accomplish, which is another one of those issues. Which I think at some point that's really a conversation that has to happen. Where what can that office do to basically address many of these issues? And since all of us work with those guys, we don't want to say anything, but the reality is that there's a lot of capability, and I think that there needs to be a discussion. How do we really expand upon that at some point in the future? So anyway, we are getting close to we got less than 15 minutes left, and I know we want to spend some time looking at Q's and A's, but I do want to ask each one of you, really, what do you think are the top priorities that we need to set forward in the next few years, really to bring more resiliency and stability to supply chains? And I guess you can pick any three you want, or you can only pick one or two. But I guess I'll start off with you, Sam, since I'll toss it to you first. What do you think are the priorities that we ought to do, other than build a new research reactor for you?
But I think infrastructure is a really big one. I think especially along the DOE complex, many of our facilities are 60 plus years old, and they're being worked harder than they've ever been worked today. So for me, that's probably one of my biggest ones. A couple other things that we didn't touch on. So a big problem for California is waste. And moving forward, if we're going to increase production, waste is going to be a big problem for us. So that's something we're trying to address, but it's ever changing. Yeah, but those are my top two.
Ah, okay, interesting. No, that's a whole nother topic. Yeah, yeah. Nikos, what are your top priorities?
Well, I'm going to speak about molybdenum-99 and also the new family of therapeutic radioisotopes. We have experienced problems with the supply chain. We need to think of what we can do in the future in order to avoid such issues. I think it's very important to invest on R&D, on innovation. Try to achieve diversification of the production. For the case of molybdenum-99, there are 6 reactors that provide like 95% of the global needs. So we must work on innovation, on new concepts, on new technologies. CANDU reactors is an example. The use of accelerators is another example. So use the technology, use the R&D in order to find new ways of producing, adding redundancy in the supply chain, and be able to achieve resilience and mitigate possible future problems. This is one thing. Then I would say that we should continue our work on monitoring and anticipating future problems. This is the work of agencies like ours. And yeah, these are, for me, the main priorities in the future.
Thank you. Richard.
So I'm going to start a little bit with first principles, I think, and talk about awareness of the impact of radioisotopes on daily lives. So again, I sound like I'm beating a dead horse here. In the province of Ontario, one of the reasons we have such overwhelming support for nuclear power is that the utilities have woven together that story about emissions-free, low-cost energy and the impact to healthcare, to people around the world through the production of radioisotopes. And I frankly think that life will be a lot easier in all of the kind of key stakeholder areas if people just have an idea more of the impact of these things. So I think that's an important, and the industry is doing a lot of that, but we need to do more of that, in my mind. The second thing I would echo whoever talked about, well, I guess everybody's talked about it so far, which is kind of infrastructure development, but really investment in new platform technologies, right? So new ways of doing things, again, whether that's expanding into the world of accelerators from reactors or different reactor technologies, both existing and future. I think that's going to be key to building that resilient supply chain.
Interesting. Steve.
Yeah, well, again, I think one of the things that makes this field so challenging is that it's a very dynamic market, that the situation that was 10 years ago is not what's today. So we just have to keep, so the first thing I would do is just keep our nose to the grindstone, in the sense that we need to, keep looking at the market, adjusting. And as part of that, I think setting up resilient supply chains, as we've mentioned, is very important, where we can look at certain isotopes and try to make sure that there's balance, so that we wouldn't have more than, say, 30% of a certain important isotope coming from a single supplier. And so we need to adjust that. And given that these are world markets, we need to look and strategize within the United States about how to set up the infrastructure to, again, balance out those supply chains where we do have maybe single source dependencies or things like that. And again, the problem is that this keeps changing, and so we just have to keep at it.
That's good. That's a good statement, Steve. I wonder who would be who or what organization would be the one that would try to make that balance available? I mean, that's a good question. What would be the governance model we try to use to limit source supply from 30%? Maybe that's for another seminar. So we have quite a few questions that have been asked, and I know John Starkey's been reviewing them. There was one that popped up, which, Steve, I'm going to throw your way, which is, are there any workforce gaps, and what can universities do to close those gaps? Because that's a good one. And A&S always likes to bring forward the role of the universities in these programs. So go ahead, Steve. How would you answer that question?
Well, workforce development is a challenge along these lines, and it's that way across what we'll say all of our STEM fields. And I'd love to just say right now that, we're just the only ones that, and again, I'm with nuclear engineering, that we need to significantly expand our workforce, but it's this way across many areas. And I think a lot of that comes down to publicity. When, again, I'll talk as a professor here, when we see students coming into nuclear engineering, they want to build advanced reactors, and those are 18-year-old students coming in the door. By the time they graduate, they've learned so much more about the different areas of nuclear energy technology, isotopes, that they really diversify where they end up being employed. Everything from going into medical applications to, again, border security, other types of accelerator applications of the technology. And so what we really need to do, and I think part of the workforce development, is the PR that sort of makes the awareness, so that people understand that this is a field that they can get into and that they can expand into. And so along that lines, and this is what I think we can do, and this might be part of our American Nuclear Society mission, is to increase public awareness of the importance of isotopes, so that people see that as something critical to our U.S. infrastructure and world infrastructure. And then they'll consider that as part of their job opportunities as well. Because really, I think fundamentally people want to do good things with their life and make a positive impact. So communicating that and keeping the PR lesson up is important.
Very good. I mean, Sam, just a quick question, because obviously in your area, how do you get people to come into this field? Because you're both a production and a research facility. So
that's correct. It's very challenging. So actinide science, we need a lot of radiochemists, we need engineers, we need pretty much everybody. And it's a challenging thing. we started a Seaborg Institute at Oak Ridge National Laboratory a couple years ago to try to help, bring in top talent to show them how interesting and unique actinide science is. But it's something where we're trying to get out and make people just interested in the field to try to attract interest.
Okay, let's see. John, I haven't been screening through all of these. You got one that you think we should try to answer right off the bat? Let's see. Oh, well, here's a good one. So how did demand-driven economics play out for the competition between U.S. reintroducing U.S. production of Moly-99 for diagnostics and the newly expanded theranostic roles for isotopes like lutetium-177 and actinium-225? Wow, that's a difficult question. Everyone trying to tackle that one? I mean, this gets back to demand-driven economics. Oh, sorry, Richard. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I could say about that is that the economic model, so there's a whole, this is like 3 more webinars on reimbursement for nuclear medicine, right? But and I think in a good way, the model for therapeutics is evolved from diagnostics. So there's a big difference today. Now whether that changes and converges over time, I don't know, but those are kind of 2 different worlds in my mind, anyway.
Well, this was a question, I guess, tossed to you, Richard, had to do with production and proportion of revenues of power versus isotopes at Bruce and Darlington, as an example, which raises a good question. You raised earlier the fact that in U.S. utilities, they make more money producing electricity than they do producing isotopes. And I know that Bruce Power has made a major investment to start producing isotopes. So there had to be a motivation and certainly a financial incentive for them to do so.
Yeah, and I think so 2 things I would say is, to my knowledge, the way that those, there are many partners involved in those investments, and the reactor partners honestly do it primarily because of the social license aspect that it gives them, right? The ability to talk about impacting the lives of people positively. They don't make a ton of money, so they don't lose money. They're not in it to kind of subsidize isotope production, but again, just from a sheer scale standpoint, the amount of money they make on isotopes is a very, very small fraction of what they do. So, and that's, again, that's the challenge in getting U.S. utilities signed up, for instance, for this PWR project, is you need to convince people that it's the right thing to do from a supply chain sustainability and overall healthcare standpoint, not necessarily from a profitability standpoint.
Do you think that does Bruce not to speak for Bruce Power, but do you see this as a social benefit?
Absolutely. Yeah, hugely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at and I would, one piece of advice I would give folks is to look at both Bruce Power and OPG in terms of the amount of time and energy they spend promoting their involvement in the isotope supply chain. Right? It's fantastic free publicity for me, right? Because they talk about cobalt-60 a lot. So.
Well, we got 2 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions. But what we'll try to do is we'll for those of you who've asked questions, we'll send them to our panelists and ask people to try to answer them. In the meantime, I'm going to bring us to a close here. Again, I want to thank to all of our panelists and participants for what you've heard today. Is isotope supply is a quiet cornerstone of our modern civilization, and its fragility exposes risks to medicine, energy, and security alike. So. Cobalt-60 and californium are like the 2 canaries in a coal mine examples of what happens when our dependence outpaces our domestic capability and redundancy of supply. So the challenge ahead is clear. Diversify production. You've heard this a lot. Modernize infrastructure, again, and we have to obviously strengthen our international collaborations. So I think with that, we'll start to bring this to a close. I want to thank the American Nuclear Society and our panelists and everybody contributing to this important discussion. And with that, again, everybody, thank you all for your efforts. And with that, I guess we are done. Although anybody who wants to remember, we'll try to do another one of these a little bit later in the year. So thank you all.